Hello, this is the TVC podcast with me, Tony Lowe. So, Braveheart is a good film. I liked that recently. Uh, I haven't seen it for a long, long time. I watched it a couple of times when I was a child. Um, and I think back then I enjoyed it for like the action and the swords and stuff. But I've only watched it for the first time as an adult recently, and I was very impressed. Oh, what a doozy of a film that was, is. And that's for a bunch of different reasons as well. So I wanted to take a bit of time to just appreciate what those reasons are, because I'm very, God, this is going to sound pretentious. I am quite picky when it comes to films. It takes me ages to find a film that I want to watch, and it takes me really, really long to find a film that I would actually like consider worth watching again. Uh, and this is one of them for sure. Also, because the quality of film, I think we can all notice, is probably decreasing quite a lot. Like it's getting harder and harder to find good films. Good films with strong, inspiring characters and messages as well. In the days of anti-heroes and non-heroes and heroes as villains or villains as heroes and all that kind of stuff, um, Braveheart is an actual film of a hero doing heroic things, which is actually profoundly refreshing. Um, and I think more important as well. I was comparing it in my mind to, I try to watch a little series whilst I've been about my travels. I watched a series called Mr. Robot, and I didn't watch all of it. I only watched about a season and a half. Quite good. It's quite well written. Actually, it's very well written. I thought the way it was all structured and brought together was quite well done. It was one of the things I was most impressed by. It's got an interesting plot and an interesting development, but my lord, is it depressing. Um, and it's depressing in a demoralizing kind of way. I always went away from the episodes thinking, yeah, I was entertained by that, but I don't feel very good. And I don't want to emulate any of the characters. Not really. In fact, no, not at all. So, and that's true of a lot of modern cinema and stories that we're given. Like they have characters and they have challenges that they overcome and stuff, but really, you wouldn't want to be these people. They're not inspiring. They're almost like just about getting by in a maelstrom of chaos and depression, or they're simply not doing the right thing. You know, I watched other shows like The Sopranos or Peaky Blinders, and yeah, you've got interesting characters there, but they're like straight up criminals, right? Who abuse and kill innocent people. Right? Not in Braveheart. Braveheart, you actually have an honest, brave man doing honest, brave things. And even if you say that's unrealistic and it's only an archetype, I like the archetypes. I like them. So, why is that the case? Well, you've got the character of William Wallace, and obviously it's not the historical William Wallace. In fact, I don't know much about the historical William Wallace. I just know that Braveheart isn't that. And they kind of say a few words about that at the very start of the film. The point is, so long as you know that the real history of William Wallace is what it is, if you want to know about that, read the histories, and if you want to watch Braveheart, just watch Braveheart and understand that it's using this story as a backdrop. The first thing that really cracked me up was, I think the opening lines talk about the state of Scotland at the time that this is all happening. And they mention the heathen or the pagan king, King Edward the First. So he threw in this nice little like pro-Catholic tidbit. The bad guy is a heathen pagan. That tickled me. Anyway, so what's so good about it? I want to give you like a brief. I won't explain the whole plot. It's quite a long film. A hell of a lot of stuff happens. But one of the things I will say to its credit is everything that happens matters to the story. It's an almost 3 hour long film, but there's not a wasted scene in the whole thing. It's all push, 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 plot, plot, plot. Everything's driving it forward, and it just doesn't feel like a long film for that reason. And that's also refreshing, because a lot of screenwriting for more modern films I've seen they all just seem to make it drag. no one seems to be able to get a story right and make it tightly written. So it was nice to see a film like that. So what are some of the main overall plots? Well, the first thing that struck me is that you're introduced to little William as a child, little William Wallace, and he's on a farm with his dad and his brother. So only men. It's a very man-heavy film, very masculine in its characters and its archetypes. And it shows really how men are working together to fight for what they perceive as justice. There are women in it, but they're very auxiliary to the story. So it's one for the boys, basically. And little William grows up on a farm with just his dad and his brother, but there's no women around. There's no mother, no sister, and no mention either. So that just is what it is. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that he sees that the English are a treacherous bunch. I am an Englishman, by the way, but we'll take the histories for what they are. I don't have to be Scottish, so I'm grateful for that as well. But anyway, I'll leave that to one side. William understands that the English can be very treacherous, and not only do they betray some of his kinsmen, but they end up actually killing his father and his brother as well when he's a young man. So what happens is William is then picked up by, we wouldn't say handed over, but picked up by his old Uncle Argyle. And he's an absolute beast of a character. You know, he's got like this eye patch and he swings a big old sword and he comes all the way from Europe and he says he's going to take him to like Rome and stuff. And he's this real like no-nonsense looking dude who you can tell is still got his heart in the right place. He like prays in front of his sword. And he says to William, you know, he's going to make a man out of him, basically. He's going to teach him how to swing a sword. He's going to teach him Latin. And most importantly, he's going to teach him how to think. You know, he sits there with William and says, look, if you want to learn how to use this sword, he taps him on the forehead and says, first, you've got to learn how to use this. And that's really good because it gives you a setup to the entire, like, you know from that scene what William's character is going to be like and how it's going to be formed because of how he's going to be brought up, right? You know what his upbringing is without having to see any of it. So by the time you see him as an adult, you kind of know what the guy's about. So I really liked that. And again, that means that he was just man on man, raised by this big old masculine like adventurer throughout his life, and he comes back with that, with that in his past. So parallel to this, we've got the villains. And although the villains are slightly cartoonish, right, the evil king really is a bastard of an evil king. He's also clever, which makes him an interesting and worthwhile, enemy. And he's there discussing with his team how to basically keep putting pressure on the Scots. And what they decide is that they need to breed the Scottish out of Scotland. So he brings in this law, which is prima nocta, right? Which means that any English lord of the local area, anytime a Scotsman becomes married, the English lord is the first person to have sex with his wife. As its own thing, that's pretty mad if you think about it, right? Because that genuinely was a thing in history. I suppose that could be its own topic, really, how crazy the idea is. But obviously it would annoy a few people. So they have this right, and when William comes back, it's during a wedding, right? So William comes back from his grand travels in Europe, right back to his farm, and he walks through a wedding in the village that he's in. So he catches up with some of his old friends, including his old, burgeoning love interest as well, and they click very quickly. And at this wedding, the wife is pulled away after she gets married by the English lord. The husband is very angry, but he decides, everyone says, let it go, because otherwise he's going to get killed. So that, another good bit of writing there. It gives you a bit of foretaste into, we've got the actual details of William and his life going on, but then you have from this scene, the background idea of what's going on between the English and the Scottish people as a whole. And that's all brought out in this wedding. Quite good. So zoom forward a little bit. William decides to go back to his farm, put it all back together. And meanwhile, he catches the eye of Mirren, who is the love interest. She gave him a flower, a thistle actually, on the day of his family's funeral. And it turns out he had kept that thistle for his entire time away in Europe. So there's this lovely little collection of scenes where like he's courting her and he's trying to bring her away and being very romantic, and eventually kind of steals her heart. And they get married, but they get married in secret because they don't want her to be stolen off by the English lords to have their babies, basically. But as it turns out, one of the English lieutenants or sergeants he's got his eye on her. He's got his greasy little eye on Mirren and finds an opportunity to try and rape her, basically. So when that happens, it all kicks off. She bites him, attacks him. William gets involved. He kicks in a load of guards, and they kind of get split up. But he says, we'll meet in the forest. So he rides off thinking she's going to be there, but no, she actually gets captured without him knowing, and she gets killed because of treason, basically, or an offence against, the king's men. So this is where the spark is really lit, and this is the trigger point for the whole film. Yeah. She's been killed, and all the British soldiers know that, or the English soldiers, I should say, know that William's going to come back for his vengeance. And he does, right? So he all rides into town, very cowboy style, very slow moving scene where he moves up to these soldiers who are about to seize him, about to grab his horse, about to do him in. And he, from behind his back, grabs this little mace and bam! It all kicks off. He starts killing loads of English soldiers, and then all of the other Scottish in the village join in as well. Because they're like, this is it. We've had enough. You thieving, raping bastards. Let's have it. And so all the Scots rise up, and they just kill all the English in the village. Now, that's a brilliant scene because, again, we want to talk about like the archetype that is being played out by this character, William Wallace. And the archetype he's aiming for is a man of violence who is trying to live by justice as much as possible. Because he's a man of violence second, but he's a man of justice first. And so I should have mentioned that, like, that's brought out in the character early in the film. Because there's a point where he returns to his village and he wants to build a farm. And the father of Mirren comes up to him and says, look, we're going to basically have a military town meeting. And William says, with all due respect, sir, I don't want to get involved because I just want a peaceful life. I want a farm, I want to raise a family, I want some chickens, just that's all I want. I don't want violence, I don't want conflict, I just want peace. But because of his situation, he's still willing to fight, right? But the war is brought upon him. All he's done is he's in a marriage with the girl he loves. She is almost raped, so he goes to defend her honor. And in the process, she is murdered simply for not wanting to be raped by people who don't, by evil people. And so he comes back and takes vengeance on that. And so the war, in that sense, is foisted upon him. But he lives through it because of justice. So he's there riding through this town. And as he's riding into town, there's no thought of there being a joint rebellion. There's no thought that anyone else, there's no predetermined plan that everyone else is going to muck in and put their lives on the line. It's just him. As far as he knows, he's going to die because there's like 20 English soldiers. But he's just going to take as many down with him as he can. He's ready to do that. But here's the thing. In the process of doing that, all of the other Scots around him think, oh God, if this guy's willing to die, then I'm willing to die as well. And if he's willing to fight and he shows that we can fight, then we're going to fight. And that's what sparks the whole thing, right? One man willing to put his life on the line in the service of justice with that bravery, then ignites everyone else to do exactly the same thing. And that's what just starts the entire war, which is the main plot of the film. Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant film. So really, loads of other stuff happens pretty quickly, like some big events. All the Scottish get drawn up. They start organising themselves. The word spreads. And then there's another interesting part of the film as well, because you've got this archetype of the man of justice, which is William Wallace. And then aside from that, you've got the other men that he needs to work with, but they're all pragmatists, right? And these are actually the Scottish nobles. So you've got really three classes of character on the big stage. You've got the man of justice, which is Wallace himself, the Scottish nobles, which are all pragmatists, and then you've got the dastardly bastard king himself and his son, who are the real villains, right? And the Scottish nobles are like, well, we want to help Scotland, but only if we get as much money and land as we can first. And if the king offers us more money and land, then we'll just take that, and to hell with the Scottish. And William is constantly annoyed with this, but he's also annoyed with the fact that the Scottish nobles actually have the power that they need to free Scotland from the English. It creates a really interesting dynamic. And this is kind of, some of this is kind of brought to the fore in the first battle. So they start getting organised. And the Scottish nobles have drawn up their own army of Scots and peasants to face the English, one of the English armies on the battlefield. And they're going to just try and vie for peace because they know the English army is going to absolutely trounce them. And so what the Scots do, what these nobles don't realise is that William and his entourage are actually on the way to this battle themselves with their own weapons. To basically beat the English army. And it's only because William arrives with his men that this Scottish army even has a fighting chance. So all the Scots in the army are basically already ready to go home because they're like, look, these are just some random nobles we don't know. I'm not going to stand here and die for these bastards. Let's go home, boys. And then William comes up and gives the real famous speech from the film. And I'm not going to repeat it because I won't do it justice. But basically he says, look, what would you rather? Would you rather go home and live as slaves for the rest of your lives, or spend this one day earning back your freedom to live as free men? And that's when the blood turns to fire. So that kicks off the first major battle. Brilliantly shot, really well orchestrated. They've said that, most medieval battles that have ever been put to film since Braveheart basically copy Braveheart because of how well it was done. Really, really brutal. But yeah, very entertaining. So that's when the Scots and William himself, realised we can do this. All this time we thought that we couldn't actually fight the English. And here we are with our first major victory. This is all possible. So the rest of the film basically is them taking that idea further and further and pushing things more and more so that they can try and liberate Scotland from England. To the point where William even thinks of invading England itself to try and push back and weaken them before that they can come back and invade Scotland. Now in the background, there's one other character who's in a really interesting position, right? We said that you've got the pragmatic Scottish nobles, who are basically just selfish, greedy men with some power and some influence. Well, it turns out the foremost of those is this guy called Robert the Bruce, who is basically the forerunner for the actual King of Scotland. So he's the most noble of the nobles. And in the background, he has a father that no one actually knows is in the area, but he's tucked away in this little tower in Edinburgh. And he's this real serpentine character who's feeding Robert all of these realpolitik kind of Machiavellian ways to manage his politics, right? You look like you're a friend to William Wallace so that we can save face. And in the meantime, I'll speak to the English or I'll speak to the lords and make sure that we've got enough influence with them that we can do the right things. Put on this face for these people and this face for these people, then that's how we're going to win the game. And you can see that Robert in his integrity is really uncomfortable with this, but he's split between his desire for the crown and his loyalty to his father as well. So he wants to do what his father says, because his father says, look, we've been building this for generations. We want to get you the power that you deserve. And so Robert is going along with this for most of the film. And it creates this real tragic dynamic where basically William is doing all he can simply for the sake of the goodness itself, for the sake of justice itself. He's just fighting with that one clear idea. We need justice and we need freedom. And I don't care about all of this politics and this carousing and all of these games that you guys are playing. We're fighting. You want to fight with us? Great. If you don't, go to hell. But Robert is there trying to negotiate with William because the nobles now understand his power. And William sees the spark of integrity in the Bruce. And he says, look, I believe in that. And he says, if you become that man that you should be, I would follow you. And so would everyone else. But you need to be that man. And so there's this kind of deep, quick rapport between William and Robert the Bruce. But again, Robert is in this real torn situation where his father is feeding him all of these evil schemes at the same time. And that culminates in a fairly tragic situation where Robert thinks he's going to do good by William, but actually ends up betraying him. That becomes important later on. So, yeah, that's towards the middle to the latter part of the film really in the middle part of the film, William is now having to wage all of these wars whilst finding the balance between the nobles and their interests and his own just direct interest of I'm fighting my rebellion, I'm leading my men forward, we need your help, but if you're not going to help us, we're going to fight anyway. Yeah. Now, another interesting part of the film is the romantic interest. Very interesting part of the film. Oh, sorry. Another thing I should have mentioned, by the way, is that another little just tidbit. At the very start of the main battle, William gets on his knees and prays. Quite cool. So anyway, back in London, in England, there is a little story going on between the king himself, Longshanks, the main villain, and his family. And it turns out his son, no mothers in this film again, because it's a film for the boys. Quite interesting. But the son is a very weak, effeminate. In fact, he's actually a homosexual, but it's never spelled out. It's just heavily implied throughout most of the film because he's got this other male character who spends a lot of time with him who's very it's all very heavily implied. So this prince, gets married to a French princess because they want to use that to strengthen their political ties. But it turns out that because this young prince is actually a homosexual, there's no love between him and the princess at all. And actually, she ends up having quite a lot of contempt for him, not just because he's a homosexual, but because he's not masculine. That's the other major problem. He's obviously a weak prince who is just cowering before his father, who's this big, tyrannical lion. So she is basically forced into this situation by marriage, not out of any kind of love or fidelity, but she's still trying to do her honor by these people. Now, because both the king and the prince are too cowardly to go and speak to William themselves, because they need to go speak to him for basically a parlance, they think, we'll send the princess instead. And the rationale for Longshanks is, well, one of two things is going to happen. Either she'll soften Wallace and make him more pliable to their schemes, or if Wallace is such a barbarian that he kills her, then that will bring the French to support the English in their war against the Scots. So she's not altogether on board with all this. She's going on with her duty. But then when she meets William, she finds him to be, a brutal and strong masculine man, but also a very principled and actually surprisingly cultured as well, right? There's a bit where they try to basically talk behind his back in Latin, and he responds back, shocking them, but obviously impressing her at the same time. So yeah, as it happens, she grows in romance with him, um, and that also becomes relevant later as well. So I really feel like I'm rambling by this point, but there's so much that happens. But it's basically this whole like political weaving of intrigue that happens throughout the center of the film around this man who just wants to get this cause fought for, whilst everyone else is being duplicitous or lying or scheming. He gets betrayed. Um, there are people trying to like run behind his back. He almost gets assassinated. Um, but all the way he's just still pushing forward for this one major goal. But then a little fork in the road appears right towards the very end. And what happens is they realize they've reached a stalemate. They realize they need the support of the Lords in order to win this rebellion, but they don't have it. And Robert the Bruce, still working with his conscience, thinks, no, I really want to give my support to Wallace. I really want to help him. And so a hand is handed out, and there's going to be a treaty between the two of them. They're going to speak and try and figure something out. And William knows he needs to do this because otherwise there's just no going forward. And so he says, we've got no other choice. We have to go and try and work with the Scottish nobles. But alas, he's betrayed. And this is the tragic thing about this whole scene, is that this is without the Bruce's knowledge. So the Bruce is all set up to, work with Wallace. And you can see he's kicking his feet. He's all chipper about it. He's really, really excited to do this, to start fighting for what he believes in. And then little to his knowledge, his father in the background organised a betrayal. And so Wallace gets captured and is sent off to London. And this is one of the most powerful scenes that starts to bring everything through, right? So just quickly to mention, because of their little love intrigue, Wallace gets jiggy with the French princess. So she's now carrying his baby, from what we can tell. And I wondered whether that was the only real immoral part of his character through the film, because otherwise I think Wallace is shown to be a moral man. He's a man of violence, but he's a man of violence in service of the good and to uphold justice. But otherwise he's a moral man. And I wondered whether this scene, because she's a married woman, he has sex with her. And I thought, oh, so is that technically showing him to be immoral? And I thought, no, because if the prince is homosexual and they never consummated the marriage, then in the laws of the church, it wouldn't have necessarily been legitimate anyway. So I thought that was interesting. So anyway, she comes in while he's in his prison cell, deeply in love with him, and is just pleading for him to cry mercy and not be tortured. Because obviously it's Middle Ages, everyone's pretty brutal. He's going to get tortured. It's going to be a pretty horrible time the next day before he gets murdered. So she says, look, cry for mercy. And he's like, nope, not doing it. Can't do it. Won't do it. Shouldn't do it. Good man, right? And she's like, well, at the very least, can you please take this painkiller that I've got? It will dull the pain. You don't have to go through the torture. And he's like, no, because it might dull my senses. And even without the slightest bit of my wits, I might be given over to cry for mercy when I know I shouldn't. Integrity. Integrity all the way through. That's what makes him such a good character. He's consistent. Whatever you might say about his shortcomings or his faults or his bad decisions or whatever, like the limitations of him as a mortal man, he's got integrity. He knows what his principles are, and he tries to live by them and fight for them throughout the whole film. That's why he's an inspiring character. Brilliant. So what he does is even more brilliant, is he knows she's going to be in distress if he doesn't take the painkiller. So what he does is he lets her give it to him in his mouth. Then she kisses him, and then after she leaves, he spits it back out again. So as far as she knows, he's got the painkiller, happy days, but he didn't actually take it, so he's going to have his full wits about him so that he can face the pain head on and not compromise any of his principles. And so that basically brings us towards the very end of the film. He's taken out into the main square of London and he is tortured in front of the townspeople, in front of the English people, ridiculed, mocked, spat at. And he goes through a series of progressively more horrible tortures. And after each time, the main torturer says to him, look, this is going to all stop. We can make it really easy for you. We'll even let you live. All you have to do is beg us for mercy. And after all that, after they do it again and again and make it worse and worse, they give him one final chance. All you need to do is cry out, mercy. And then as he can see that Wallace is gasping for air, he stops the crowd, brings up silence and says, the prisoner wants to say a word. And when Wallace catches his breath, that final single word that he says, freedom. Freedom. And I would have never been able to do it justice on this podcast, because when he hits that in the film, he really hits it. You know, after all that, the torture, the pain, the death, all he had to say was mercy. And instead he said no. Freedom. That is what I am. That is what I've been fighting for this whole time. And death was never the problem. Pain was never the problem. Only the morality was. And that's what he lives by, and that's what he dies by to the very end. And so that's basically Braveheart. There is actually more to the story than that, but I'm going to leave the very ending for you to watch if you haven't seen it. Because the real ending, where it actually ends up, is also fantastic. But I think that's a good place to stop. So there's so many things I liked about the film. Like I said, it's got the archetype of a moral man, a moral Catholic man, I might say. Mel Gibson obviously gets his moral archetypes from Catholicism, and it reminds us that even through our faith, we have to have a fighting spirit as well. It's not just water and soap. As good Catholics, we are men who are willing to fight. We should be men who are willing to fight. And it's about a character who is masculine, which is a rare thing to see in detail. He's masculine and moral, which is even more rare, you know, because you can see plenty of masculine characters on TV and film in various places, right? So Tony Soprano comes to mind, Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders, but these are all anti-heroes, right? They're all masculine characters who are, in fact, well, evil in many cases, right? Or in many ways. Whereas William Wallace in Braveheart is both masculine and moral. So it's a rare little treat for that reason. It's a rare thing to see. So that's what the story is about. It's about a man, a masculine man, a moral man who sticks by his integrity and fights for it to the very end. And as simple as that seems, sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes that's all you need. And there are other things I liked about it, like how it was made, how it was shot. All of that was quite good. All of the characters are fun. All of them are fun. They're all interesting in their own little way. The bastards really are bastards. The ones you want to like are really easy to like. That was all great. And the other thing I like about Braveheart and a lot of Mel Gibson's films actually is he has this real respect to family in it as well. He always seems to present a strong, good family connections within films as well. In this one, it's very brief, but even, you know, those beginning scenes where you see little William and how he interacts with his father, perfect balance that the father showed between being stern and disciplined, yet respecting his son and loving him and obviously caring about him. And that was shown very quickly, but I thought in a very effective way. So I like that about the film as well. Go watch it, basically. I don't want to really say much else. I don't think I've even really properly done it justice in this, but I wanted just to talk about it a bit because I thought it was a cracking film. So that'll be all for this episode, I think. TonyVCLow.com, TonyVC, the letters Low, LOWE.com for my main website. I'm on YouTube, and I've got my academy as well, but I'm thinking about platforms for that at the moment. But in any case, you can at least find the Trivium series available if you go to tonyvclow.teachable.com. Hopefully I'll have something more developed with that in the next few months. But, you can look in the links to this episode, look in the description to this episode for any links as well. So yeah, thank you all for your time. God bless you, and I hope you have a lovely day.